Welcome, everyone. We still have some people trickling in. So we're going to wait maybe just one more minute until it looks like the number of attendees is stabilized a little bit. Give people, those of us who might arrive to things a little bit later than others, we'll just give them a few minutes to join us. Yes, good what time of day it is where you're at. So it's morning where I am, so I said good morning. So if it's evening where you are, then good evening. All right, and it looks like kind of attendee number has stabilized a little bit, so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming to the Agile New England Mob Programming Gathering. We're excited to have you all here, and we're excited to have a nice panel for you all to enjoy. Just have a few things to go over real first before we dive in and start hearing from the panelists. First up is just kind of wanted to go over the agenda. So first up, the first part is going to be open remarks, which I'm doing now, and then introductions from each of the panelists. We'll dive in and actually have a nice panel discussion, and that is only going to include panelists for that portion. Then we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. People can continue to use the chat feature during that time. And then after the break, we will open up questions to attendees for the panel. And then we will close out with ideas for future events and connections. So looking forward to hearing from everyone today. Do have some ground rules to go over. So please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. We'll have people who are monitoring those, and we'll get questions to me to moderate to the rest of the panel. The raise your hand feature is something we're not going to be using for the first portion, but we will be using later on. So if you'd like to speak after the break, just raise your hand, and then we will call on people one at a time to ask questions. If you need to get somebody's attention for technical support, we do have a few people who are monitoring the chat for technical support. Type support in all caps to get their attention. They'll be watching out for that. And then we are going over our, this event is covered by our code of conduct. Agile New England takes its code of conduct very seriously. So please, take a moment to familiarize yourself with it and recognize that, anyone who violates it will be asked to leave. So if you're not willing to abide by these rules, and we would kindly ask you to go ahead and leave now. So that is that. So thanks again for coming to the Mob Programming Gathering, and where we're talking about learning. So our goal for today is to talk about learning and how mob programming can facilitate learning. I will be your moderator for this discussion. This is probably the most you'll hear from me during this entire discussion. I hope for this event to be really driven by the wonderful panelists who we have. But up first, a little bit about me. I have been mob programming since I learned about it in 2015, when I saw some presentations by Woody and Llewellyn Falco and others. And since then, really just dove in and really enjoyed it. And the company that I co-own, Corgi Bytes, has been a sponsor of the mob programming conferences that have been held in Boston. And so we've been really proud members of the community, and really enjoy this group, and just how much learning comes out of every one of our opportunities to work with Agile New England. So really appreciate them inviting me to come today. It's very, very kind to have me moderating. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panelists today, and would like each one to introduce themselves in turn, and just let us know, who you are, where you're located geographically, and let people know a little bit about you. So up first, we'll do Leah. And you are on mute, Leah.
Okay, so my name is Leah. I work from Sweden, Stockholm, as UX designer and user research. My area of expertise is within mob program is gathering people with different skill sets into the mob. And I've been working like this for 4 years. So what I love about mob is the gathering of multiple perspectives where we can build on each other's ideas and create more relevant, innovative, and less biased solutions, which I think are really important aspects when you deliver value for users. And it's fun and inclusive. And right now, I'm working at Swedish television, leading the design process in a multidisciplinary team. I've been doing so for 3 years. It includes product owner, developers, testers, visual designer, and me. We develop services for news and the sports departments. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Leah. Mira?
Yeah, hi, I hope you can hear me. My name is Mira. I'm 30 years old and I'm currently living in Brunswick, Germany. I came here 10 years ago to study mathematics and economics, and after finishing my studies 3 years ago, I was a little bit tired of math, and I decided to start working as a test consultant here in Brunswick. I'm currently working in a Scrum team together with 5 developers and 2 designers, and my daily project business includes automating tests as well as testing manually, and of course, for me, it's very important to take care of the whole team quality, not only the code quality. And to achieve this, this team quality and the code quality, I like to introduce new methods in the teams I'm working in, and I like mob programming, and of course, especially for me, mob testing. So you can say that it is my passion to show others the benefits of mob programming and of course mob testing. And yeah, of course, at the moment, I think like everyone else, we are doing it totally remote. Yeah, and I hope we have a nice evening. Yeah.
Super, I'm sure we will. Joe?
Hello, excuse me. Hello, my name is Joe Yoder, and I'm from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is a couple hours south of Chicago. So it's still morning for me anyway. And I'm definitely excited to participate with this first online mob programming gathering. I've been working in the software community for a long time, which includes running my own company, The Refactory, for over 20 years. I feel fortunate that I was involved with the people that coined the term and did the first both research work as well as the first commercial refactoring tools before Martin Fowler even knew what the term refactoring was. One of my first contracts was with the Illinois Department of Public Health, leading a team using extreme programming practices such as paired programming and test-driven development. Over the years, I've consulted with various companies around the world, often working with fully remote teams, developing software using various lightweight, agile, lean methodologies. I was introduced to mob programming in 2014 by shepherding the first Agile experience report on mob programming by Woody, who you'll hear from later. We became instant Skype friends, and we worked out a way where I could travel to his organization to get direct experience with mobbing. Since then, I became passionate about mobbing and these practices, and have continued practicing, writing, and teaching these principles in various settings. I'm looking forward to today's gathering and would like to thank Agile New England and the organizers for creating this event and inviting me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Zagroba. I'm American and I'm living here in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I came here to work for an enterprise software company, and I am a test engineer embedded on a team with 3 developers at the moment. And the mob that I've been participating in for most of the time that I've been here has been test engineers who are embedded on different teams. We're all using our company's product to build the products that we're building, if that makes sense. And we get together once a week to share product knowledge and share exploratory testing skills and techniques. We learn how to troubleshoot the applications that we're building. So I was really excited to be a part of this panel, speaking specifically about learning in a mob. And I look forward to learning from all of you.
Awesome. Thank you. Woody, you are last but not least.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Woody Zuhl. I've been programming since, I believe, 1982. I started programming because I needed software, and the software I could buy was not very good. So I figured these companies that are writing this software and they're making money on this software that's not very good, maybe I could learn to write software that's not very good and make money that way too. But that really just became a hobby for me. For about 15 years, I wrote a lot of software. And somewhere about 15 years in, they started talking about pair programming. I was working solo up till that point. And once I learned pair programming, it became obvious to me this higher level of collaboration was really useful. And then eventually during 2005 and 6, we started programming with more people. In 2011, I was working at a place where we were focusing on learning to collaborate well. And that sort of just brought up by accident the idea of 5 or 6 of us sitting in front of one computer. And in a way, that's how mob programming was born. So I'm really glad to be here today. I'm really excited about remote learning, but also learning in general with mob programming. It's a highly accentuated learning environment to work in. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. That's it for the slides that we have for now. And for those of you who arrived late, this would be our first half panel discussion, and this discussion is just with our panelists. And then we're going to have a short break. And then after that break, we will open up questions to attendees via the raise your hand feature in Zoom. But for right now, we won't be using that raise your hand feature. If you have questions you'd like the panelists to consider, please use the Q&A feature within Zoom. And we have someone who's monitoring that, and we'll filter questions up to my attention or to the rest of the panelists, and we will work them in as best we can. So if you see questions addressed in out of order, that's why. So, but let's go ahead and kick off the discussion. Woody, a question for you. I imagine there are people here who have never heard of mob programming before, or if maybe they have, but they don't really know what it's about. Can you help us kind of frame the discussion by explaining what mob programming is and why someone would use it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Originally, when we started mob programming, we didn't think we were doing something that was important to anyone else. By accident, more or less, people started hearing about what we were doing, and we came up with a very short phrase to describe it, shorter than they call an elevator pitch. And it was this: mob programming is all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. And I believe that the basic idea of Agile software development was that collaboration is critical to us. Almost the entire manifesto and principles, share that concept. So if you could just picture 5 or 6 people sitting in front of one screen or a couple screens that are large, so they can all see them at the same time. One person's at the keyboard. They're not. It's not 5 or 6 people watching one person coding. It's 5 or 6 people guiding and leading the decisions about what we're going to do, and the person at the keyboard is merely capturing that into whatever documents or code or tests or whatever we need to do. So if you just imagine high-level collaboration continuously throughout the working period, where we are all focused on the same thing and at the same time, and we don't need to be in the same physical space. It could be a virtual space or remotely. That's mob programming. Is that good enough? Do you think we covered it?
I think that's great. I think that's great. So, one of the questions we've had come in so far is, what are your best tips and tricks for winning over those colleagues who may always prefer to work alone? And so we'll just kind of open the floor. Raise your hand if you'd like to, for the panelists, if you'd like to take that one.
I'll go ahead and start
Okay.
in.
Yeah,
When
please
I
do.
when I first started programming, there was almost no way to work with other people unless you were in a company where there were lots of other people you could work with. So in my case, I was working alone writing software for the company that I owned, and I couldn't turn to anyone else. So I worked solo really for 15 years. And so almost all of us in software development, testers included, even document writers who write the requirement documents or the analysts who determine the documents and so on, we're used to working alone. We practice working alone through much of our career. So to change to something where we're collaborating more can be a bit difficult. So exposing people to this, that it can be useful, is a good start. There is also a big cost to separating people. If we separate people and we work alone, then we have a higher cost of communication. We have the cost of the coordination. We also have lengthened the feedback loop. So it takes us longer to get feedback from the work that we're doing. There's other issues with it as well. And if we can help people understand, even just to try it, the one trick that I've used, if it's a trick, is to be sure that you're involving people who are ready to do this. You know, there's a lot of people that aren't ready, but I've noticed that if you get some people together and you start doing it, and I've helped maybe 300 or 400 teams now start doing mob programming, you get them together and they're interested in doing it, they start getting good results, they're going to spread that around to their friends in the company or whatever, and pretty soon those people want to try it. Make it easy for them to join you, and they'll pick up on it. There might be some other good tips people here will have on how to get people involved.
You mentioning like kind of backing people into it makes me think of how for many different things I've had success with just not giving it a name until we're doing it.
Yeah.
And people are enjoying it, and then once they're enjoying it, say, "Oh, by the way, this has a name. You can go learn more about it." So
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, when I first started doing pair programming, I wanted to tell everybody you should be doing pair programming, and that was not the right approach. What I found after a while is I would take a story card off the board and say, hey, I'm going to start working on this task or whatever, but I really don't understand it too well. Is there someone here who can help me? And then we sit together at the same computer, getting help. We don't realize that what we're doing is going to really kind of be pair programming. But I think that it's a natural thing. Humans naturally like, we're built to collaborate. We've learned to not like it maybe. But somebody else will probably have something.
Joe, jump in. I see you've got something to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I really appreciated what he was sharing, and I was thinking back that even before I was doing, over 20 some years ago, I was doing extreme programming and pair programming, and we formalized it with our whole group, writing medical software. But even before then, we would still collaborate, but the collaboration was like not part of the norm. We would have to really go out of our way to collaborate. So let's have a meeting. So let's all get in a room. Maybe we'll do whiteboarding sessions, which had value for collaboration. And occasionally I'm having a problem, and then, so maybe I try to get a hold of somebody, one of my colleagues, and like we were doing some pair programming. We didn't call it pair programming then. We'd pair up, but it was for a limited amount of time, because it was like not the norm and considered like a bad practice in sense. Oh no, you need to do this on your own. And, even when I was learning computer science and at a university, all the assignments were in the early days were on your own. Later on, that's changed a lot, where we should get to, the real world, you're working with teams and doing things. And so when I did do the pairing, I would be pairing up with people and they would help me, but then we'd go off and spend most of the day by myself. And in fact, sometimes, I'm interrupting Woody if I ask him this question. That's, luckily I'm always looking, well, maybe he's not typing now, or he's walking over to the coffee to get some coffee. So then I can rush over and maybe, hey, I'm having some trouble with this, and then maybe we could, and that's where a lot of the nice collaborations would happen. So when I was doing the pair programming, one of the things I really liked, and I really appreciated what Kent Beckett said about it early on, is pair programming isn't about just us taking turns typing or whatever. Pair programming, we keep each other on task. Brainstorming, we're refining the system, clarifying the ideas, take initiative when one of us are stuck, thus lowering frustration, and hold each other accountable to team practices. one thing I really appreciated when Woody invited me to join the, at Hunter, and I went out there, my first day I added value. They were working on something I knew nothing about, but I did know some things about other things, and I learned about the domain environment quickly. I even rotated in. I was moving tasks on the Kanban board. They put me on the keyboard for a while. It's like, wow, I'm adding value. And there was some stuff they came up with, which I knew about and was able to add instant value in that. And so when I was doing pair programming works well, it seems like, for shorter sessions, but sometimes you get burned out because you have to always stay focused all the time through that. And so when I had a full team and we were doing it all the time for the Illinois Department of Public Health, you could really go no more than about 4 hours a day of just constant. You'd have to kind of back away and have your own alone time. But with mobbing, I didn't get that kind of session. I could zone in and out, come in and out much more easily. There was this constant rotation and things going in. I didn't get that burnout. So it almost reminded me of one analogy I've used with some friends of mine over the past few years with mobbing versus pair programming, strictly just two people versus swarming it up to, 4, 5, 6 or whatever, is it's almost like a couple versus a family. So a couple, it's like when it's on, it's awesome, it's really good, but sometimes things like, we need to get away from each other for a while. Whereas with mobbing, that happens in general, like the family. So if there's a little bit of conflict, somebody else comes in to resolve it, or you kind of rotate around. So there's kind of this cool dynamic that happens with that. And so that's something that got me very excited about it, even though I love pair programming as well, but the swarming kind of takes it up. And just one more thing I want to add, and then I'll shut up because I see Elizabeth had something with that too. When Woody was talking about mobbing, I think there's a whole gambit of different variations of swarming or mobbing. So, and the cool thing I liked, even when Woody wrote his first experience report, I was like, Woody, what's the main message you want all these people to read it? Because that was my purpose, was not to tell Woody what to write, but to help him get his main message across. And one thing he told me is that constant learning and inspecting and adapting, which was something that I really appreciated. That's part of it's very, even though extreme programming kind of had it implicit, it was very explicit with mob programming, with this constant learning and retrospective and continuing to improve.
Awesome. Elizabeth or Mira.
Yeah, I would like to add something very easy. I think most of the time it's easy thing that works. So what I am using when I try to introduce mob programming or mob testing to a new team, I think you all have heard about TDD, but I use BDD. So it's not behavior-driven development in this case, it's biscuit-driven development. So that means I always bring candies or chocolate or cookies to the first sessions, and the developer will come because they will have cookies. And then
I love that.
That sounds funny, but it works, because then they join your session because of the cookies, and then they realize that it is fun to have a mob. And then they will come the second session, they will come maybe because of the cookies, but then I think during the time they will realize that it is really fun to have a mob. Yeah, and my experience showed me that this is working.
That's brilliant. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was going to return back to the question, which was sort of how do you entice people to get involved, or how do you encourage them to? And one of the things that we tried that did not have that consequence was having our mob in a physical space where people would notice it. So we were in a glass conference room right next to sort of the groups that we were working with. We had an enormous television such that it barely fit in the room. Like you could see from miles away what we were doing on this screen, the computer. And so people,
so it was obvious you were writing a
program
then, right? Like,
and it was obvious that, like, particularly you could compare the people in the room to what we were working on and say, like, hey, that's not their product. What are they all doing together, right? Like, this is suspicious. Why is this group of people here? And it was in a spot where you could sort of stop by and observe for a bit. And so the combination of those factors made us think that and taking the block of time from each of the testers on these teams too made us think like, aren't our developers going to ask at some point what we're doing, or aren't our bosses going to notice at all? But yeah, that didn't turn out to be a consequence, which was surprising for us. But I do remember that, at least from Woody's book, that it felt like the placement of the physical environment and changing where you were doing it and making that really obvious was part of getting people into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
to the question how you like start, and so it was a long time ago, but I usually use two things. Either I am annoying, like asking questions, being interested in like what the developers are doing. Why is that there? And can you explain it on this like whiteboard architecture? And usually not even the developers know exactly, so they need to collaborate. So that's how we collaborate. That's one of my techniques. And the other is simply asking for help, like, because if you are the first one to ask for help, it's kind of like I need you to look at this, instead of me just saying, oh, can I help you, sort of, because then I might be like a above person. But usually being annoying, and yeah, that's my biggest tips. And when things go well, like in my workplace at Swedish Television, we were the first team that mobbed like everything, and now I think we're about 30 teams, and most teams do some sort of mob because the word spreads. So
That's great. And just a quick show of hands for people who are watching, like, this is a remote setup, and we're living in a very remote experience right now with so many of us working from home. How many of you before COVID-19 had experience with doing remote mob programming? Awesome. Okay. And so for those of you for which that's something that you did before, how did you enjoy that? How did you feel it worked relative to doing that work in person?
Well, I can throw in on that.
Yeah.
So when we first started mob programming, we were just all in the same room, but we had a need in two different cases to work with somebody on our team that was there physically with us that had to go and work from home for a while. And that actually turned out to be a good experience. We practiced it beforehand, but it worked okay. But we were doing it where it was partly remote, if you want to think of it that way, where most of the team was still physically together. But as the next few years went by, and I started being more of an internationally connected person on these things, I was working with a lot of teams that were in many different places. And this worked out extremely well. It wasn't a forced remoteness just because we have travel restrictions or can't come together, but it was for different advantages. The advantage of being able to have a particular team member that they couldn't get to move, or maybe it was a short effort and the people were spread out all over the world. There was no way they're going to bring everybody together for this 2 or 3 month period and so on. And learning the protocol of working remotely is pretty straightforward. It's different than working together. So to heighten the learning here, we would do very frequent retrospectives in some cases, like we would set aside a 2-hour session to work. And at the end of that 2-hour session, during that session, we'd have a few breaks, but at the end, we'll do a really quick retrospective to amplify the learning. What went well during this time? What do we want more of? And as we went through days and weeks of doing this, in certain cases, it just naturally, we found the protocols that work. There's no list of protocols. You need to find it for your own team. But an example here is, if everybody's talking at the same time, it just isn't going to work. So you need to learn the protocol of allowing somebody else the time to speak, which I'll do right now for someone else.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, please.
And yeah, you do learn the protocols. I mean, I've been working with remote teams for quite some time, at least 15 years or more with that. And we weren't doing mobbing then, but some pair programming or whatever. But so you do learn a protocol. But one thing is when I, from some of my early experience with doing more of the swarming mobbing more actively remotely, whenever I did that before the COVID before the quarantine. It didn't happen full time all the time remote. So when we're working remote, it wasn't like we did the same that we could do when I was in person. Like, okay, we can do a full day together. We're going out to lunch together, taking our breaks together and everything. And then you have those side conversations, which are very useful as well while the team's going. Those were a lot of challenges that happened. So a lot of times before some of the recent events with the quarantine, I didn't do it for a long period. And even when you did remote, you'd still want to get the team kind of get together. And I built relationships from that. I've been seeing a lot of challenges over the last few months, especially with full-time remote all the time, where people don't come in, such as, maintaining focus and having to take those regular breaks and finding out, so adapting some of the protocol, dealing with distractions or keeping the morale up, how to do the sharing, how to have the side conversations, or maybe they don't happen as much or things like that. So those are some of the challenges, not get zoomed out, get up and walk around. See, that happened easily when I was when we're all together in the same physical space. I need a break now. I'm not on the keyboard now. I'm just going to take a short walk, go get some water, coffee, get away, maybe, check a few things and come back. And that's one of the nice things. But it seems like sometimes with the online, people feel like, ooh, I can't do that, even though we can. But sometimes feel, oh, I have to stay in front of this computer screen all this time. People will see, because they're all seeing each other on the screen like we are now. And so those are some of the challenges, how to unplug and step back.
Yeah. Elizabeth, I'm curious about your team. Oh, sorry, Leah.
No, it's still fine.
Okay. Elizabeth, I'm curious about your experience, because you were doing mod programming before COVID, and then, you continued doing it after, I'm assuming?
Yes, that's correct.
So how has that been like? Because I know for myself, like, I was working remotely before, and working remotely during has been completely different. And so I imagine that that's been a tough transition for you all as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's been super smooth. I had worked for a different company remotely, sort of in the before. Yeah, this experience has definitely been different. I think the most obvious change has just been that we had a couple of parents on the team with younger kids, and they just sort of couldn't set aside the time and the focus, and just sort of the distraction and way that they could balance their life was such that this was not a priority for them. Which is a shame, because they were learning so much and I enjoyed their company, and because they're not on my team, I just don't get to see them anymore. Right, I would have to sort of set aside some other time to then have another Zoom call in my life, which is not something I'm looking to add at the moment. But yeah, figuring out some of the stuff that we want to practice in person, as far as listening to each other, sort of going back to who is the driver, who is the navigator, what kind of roles do we have, how is the conversation flowing, are we just talking and only accepting one person's ideas, right? It's not that those problems are wholly different in a remote space, it's just that they manifest themselves differently.
Leah, I'd like to create space for you to add what you were going to.
Yeah, the first was if it was different. It is different. In a way, it's easier when everyone's remote than when some people are co-located. You don't forget people, and easier things are like, we actually onboarded 2 people on the team after COVID, and I'm not really even sure how you onboard people if not in a mob when you're remote. But as Elizabeth said, I mean, like, having kids, I have a kid, and they're always like sounds all the time, and it's difficult to have a video ongoing all the time and not get disturbed. So but if I wouldn't have like kids at home, I probably doing mob isn't really much more difficult. it's more you really need to take breaks. And I miss this. We always went to lunch together. I mean, we did everything as a mob, and kind of, I mean, we have merchandise, our mob with our logo. We made a logo for our mob. So, I mean, I miss them, sort of. But it works still quite well with remote mobbing.
I did find it was easier to read the room and decide sort of how the energy was feeling and say, oh, okay, we're going to all sort of take a break, get a cup of tea, step away for a minute together. It feels very selfish to
physically together. That was
physically together,
yeah.
and yeah, just sort of to change the atmosphere and the mood. Sometimes you just need to sort of shake things up for a minute. It feels very selfish to demand that now remotely.
Yeah, that was one thing I was kind of noticing too, when some of the teams I'm working with doing mobbing now, is sometimes, yeah, is it selfish for me to go get a coffee? Whereas before I didn't have that feeling at all. And so that's where I almost need to be explicit that is okay. And then, because one thing that I felt that was real key to one of the mobbing practices is this continuous learning. And so I know when the early days when I went and I joined Hunter for the day, they always started out with a little bit of a learning thing. It seems like that's not happening as much, or those mini retrospectives, sometimes those can get missed. And I think that's key, where we're just caught up. Oh, we're done. Look, I've got things. I'm zoomed out. Let me just get away. Rather than whereas in physical, it's like, okay, let's take that 5 minutes to still do that mini retrospective at the end of the day. Let's still start off with some learning exercises. We don't need to jump right in. And plus, being personal, asking you, how are you doing? And admitting that, hey, this is affecting me emotionally. A lot of these things going on in today's world is definitely having an emotional effect on me, and being honest about it, that sometimes I'm very uncomfortable. Sometimes I'm very okay with it. And yeah, and I know how to work remotely. I've done it for years, but still there's challenges with full remote all the time and these other things, and getting honest about what's going on and being open for other people with that.
Yeah. So something that you just said really resonated with me. One of the things I kind of ask when I first, out of all of us, when we first started doing mob programming, is that we're as focused on making it easy for our teammates to work well as we are in having things our own way. We're looking to how do we make this better experience for our teammates. And I think when we're working remotely, you can put a card up, or whether when you sit down in the morning, you be sure to see it, that reminds you that your job here is to make it better for everyone else. What can I do to make this a wonderful day for everyone else on the team? And if we take that kind of attitude, and each one of us sort of shares in that attitude, we can get a really good remote experience. I sometimes have my grandson with me. He's now about 4.5. And you know how kids are at that age. It's not something that you can't tell them, don't interrupt, but they're then part of the experience. And I worked with a team in the last 2 months or 3 months that we worked for 6 weeks. I was helping them learn mob programming along with some other things with some other coaches. And some of them had their kids and their family all around them, because that was what they had to do. They didn't have a separate room or a time they could set aside. We just have to have patience and realize let's make it easy for them to deal with their situation, and maybe slow down how fast we think things should be going. I think a powerful thing about mob programming is we're not focused on working fast. We're focused on working well. If we get the flow into our work, things get done, I would say, much more rapidly, even when we're not working really fast, because we have the brain power of 5 or 6 people. If we get off track on something, someone else brings us back. So there's a lot of value in having that cognitive load shared across 6 or 7 people. And I think in a remote world, even more so than in the workplace.
Perfect. Mira, I'm curious if you know of if you've encountered any consistent common problems that teams have had with mobbing. Is that something that you can share your experience on, like kind of challenges?
Yes, of course. last year I joined the team, and on the same time we got a new colleague from Hungary, and we were all located in one place. And this colleague was working remote then, and we had to onboard him. Or we had, sorry, I have to correct me. We had 2 new colleagues from Hungary, so we had to onboard them. And the problem was that, yeah, of course, we all speak German here in our office, and one of the new colleagues speak English and Hungarian, and the other one only speaks German and Hungarian. So we did not have a common language. So yeah, we tried different ways to have a mob or have meetings to onboard them. First try was to do that in German and translate the main stuff to the colleague who only speaks English, but that did not really work out well. So yeah, we tried to teach him German, but that's not that easy in a few weeks. So yeah, we did not found a good solution. So then it happened that the only German-speaking Hungarian left the company. So the solution was that one of them had to leave the team because we did not find a solution. So that was a big problem we had with a mob, or in general with a team. Yeah.
So did your team switch to speaking all in English at that point?
Yeah.
Then?
Yeah.
Okay.
We switched to do all meetings in English. Yeah.
I imagine that was challenging for people who may have been more comfortable speaking in German.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it was something you did to accommodate this other team member.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I'm curious if anybody else that's a brilliant problem. Like prior to that one of the biggest ones I'd heard was like, keyboard layout. When you're physically co-located, if somebody has a keyboard, such as say a German or Hungarian or other keyboard that's less familiar to everyone in the group, that can be a challenge. That's, for me, it's only really popped up at the Mob Programming Conference, but I'm curious if there's any other challenges people have encountered.
Well, I'm always ready to pop in with some observations.
You unmuted yourself, Woody. I thought you were going to talk, so go for it.
So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So early on, maybe one of my first workshops in mob programming was a firm that happened to be in Stockholm, and we had 25 people in the room, each with a different native language. How often do you come up with that? And so they had sort of in this company kind of settled on a few group languages to use, but I kind of believe that we have so much more experience in our native language than any other, including programming languages or other spoken languages, that we do our best thinking and conversations in our native language. We're not double translating and stuff like that. So I think this is something that needs to be understood, but there are lots of ways to work with that. And one of them is whiteboards. So remotely using whiteboards is a little more of a challenge. I've been practicing lately with both having a camera on a physical whiteboard when I want to talk about something and using online whiteboards. So that's something we need to work with. I noticed in the pictures that Leah, that you shared in your article about working with your team at the Swedish television, and you have these whiteboards, like 4 or 5, and you've turned some of your cabinets into whiteboards, and everything is a whiteboard everywhere around you. And I want to share a quick little thing. Communication is tough no matter what, and this is why I really love mob programming. It's not just us talking, not just taking it to the whiteboard, but it's also quickly doing the work. We clear up the miscommunications and the misunderstandings when we take it to actual work sooner rather than later. And that's a powerful thing. As soon as we start putting it into something we can click on a screen, we go, wait, that's not what I meant, or, oh, I like that better. The communication clarifies itself. But it looks like, because Leah, that you've unmuted, you maybe have something to reflect on about your whiteboard or something.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I think we had at some point 8 whiteboards. So when we were going fully remote, we we took just pictures of the whiteboards and like left the building. So and then we put all the pictures in actually Google Docs, which we still call the tavla, which is like the picture, I mean like board. So it's still called the board, and there are some old pictures there, but it went fine. We're doing well anyway, even though we miss our boards. But it is true that it's, I know that some teams, especially when you do multidisciplinary teams, struggle with that not everyone knows all the tools. But a whiteboard pen, everyone can use a whiteboard pen. It's very inclusive in that sense. But you can have digital whiteboards. But yeah.
I want to reflect on that real quick, if that's all right. Joe, I think you may have something you want to say. I believe from my experience and from studying that we can gather information into our, internalize things many different ways. One is by hearing somebody else speak. One is by having a conversation or us ourselves speaking. Another is by reading something. Another is by trying something. Another is by drawing. Another is by watching someone else draw, moving drawings, moving things around. All of these fire different, I'm not a scientist, synapses or whatever in our brain, and it causes the information to get in from different directions. I've read articles that tell us some people think better when they're merely doodling while somebody else is talking. They're not doing anything like sketch noting or something. I believe if we use more avenues to communicate, we're going to learn better and we're going to understand better. But the one powerful thing about the whiteboard is it's like a shared memory location. Just like in our computer, if we're going to have two apps needing to use the same data, we could need some mechanism for sharing that information. And the whiteboard gives us a shared memory location for 5 or 6 of us. Once we put something on the board, we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over. Oh, this was my idea. Then we have to say it again later and again later. We just point to it. And as we refine it, it becomes refined for everybody. So the whiteboard, I think finding ways to do something like a whiteboard remotely will really help with the learning and knowledge transfer on the team. But Joe, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'll follow up with that too, because one company that I've been working with in Brazil, Nubank, is all their walls and everything is whiteboard. And so it's awesome. And they started experimenting with mobbing, keeping it simple with just a couple smaller screens, but now it grew and they have big stations and a lot of different swarming but the whole environment is very conducive with whiteboards everywhere, every wall, everything. And you go around, you just see all these things, people constantly up doing that. Trying to do that remotely has been more of a challenge. There's a lot of online tools or whatever, Miro, Mural, there's Sketch, whatever. And I always say, and I'm agnostic to any of them. I always say, do whatever adds value to the team, but it seems to get lost a little bit, but having that still, trying to have that out there. Something that Woody was sharing, I definitely wanted to follow up. It triggered something me to think about is all the different avenues for doing this. And I used to have a old quote I really like that I would say a lot because it made a lot of sense to me anyway. It's like, tell me and I'll probably forget, show me and I'm seeing some things doing. Maybe I'll remember a little bit of it, but involve me and I understand. And that's where I need that whole mix of things. So if somebody's telling me something, but then I'm kind of seeing what's going on, but now they're even kind of like, okay, now I have the keyboard or I'm on the whiteboard and we're drawing together. Now I will say this too, is because I've also done a lot of remote workshops even before the quarantine and also after I've been doing this is sometimes I've seen the shared drawing because a lot of our exercises are doing shared drawing things. Normally when we do this as a physical environment, only one person or 2 people are up at the whiteboard at a time with a marker. Well, one of the nice things with some of the shared drawing tools, I've seen that some of the experience has been, it's even been better remotely if people work out how to do it. So then all of a sudden everybody's drawing and moving things around together. And it was even more productive because I did a workshop last November. Half of the team was remote for the workshop and the other half was physical there. And when we had the exercises with the shared whiteboarding type, brainstorming type things, the remote team surprised me and actually did a lot better because they started working out a nice way of interacting. So even though it's more challenging, sometimes people forget because it's not right there, right next to you, all around you all the time. If that's part of the environment, so making that explicit, but it can be more productive if it's done right. But I definitely like that. Tell me and I'll forget, or show me and I might remember, but involve me and then I understand type thing from that.
That's great. One of the questions people sent in was, a concern that they get often is that the smartest person in the room will tend to either dominate the discussion, either get bored, or or the rest of the group feels like they're really driving the whole effort, and that for the rest of the people doesn't feel very collaborative. I've heard that experience as well. So I'm curious how, as people who help facilitate mob, people working in a mob environment, how do you work with that person to try to make the experience good for everybody? And I'd like to hear from either Leah, Elizabeth, or Mira first.
Okay, I can have a short one. We try to do, at least when we were still co-located, we try to do rotation, just in mob when you code, because then there will always be the driver drawing the thing that the team navigates, and then you switch and so on. So that's one way of keeping everyone focused and not bored and involved, I would say. So just keeping the rotation, I guess.
Yeah, I had a similar experience of sort of making sure that the roles are more strict and having either a designated facilitator to call out when people are going outside those roles, or as the group becomes more mature, being able to call that out in the moment. We did start doing retrospectives in the middle of our sessions rather than at the end, so that we could both address it while it's happening and then practice the change that we wanted to do, like in that same day, in that same moment. Because generally our mobs were once a week, and so sort of waiting until the next week to improve was too long a feedback loop, right? We wanted to get that going right away.
Something I like to do is to give some rules at the beginning, or decide for some rules together with a mob. And one of the rules is that when you're an expert, then give the others the chance or the time to ask questions and to drive. And everyone has to commit to these rules at the beginning of the session. And I am, as a moderator, can stop people from talking all the time by give them the hint that we have that rule and he committed to this rule. And that's easier to say, please give the others the chance to also ask questions and drive. Yeah, I think that's a good way to commit on rules at the beginning.
So it sounds like the facilitator is a rather important kind of component in having this work successfully. Is that a fair?
Yeah, if you have a facilitator, and so I've seen a lot of variations of doing some of these things. I have one colleague, a good friend of mine, that from a very well-known technical company, and they've been doing some they had mob teams. I went there and very nice setups for it for quite a few years, close to 5 years now they've been doing it. And he said they've had mixed results in the real world. Some downsides include the power imbalance, in particular with underrepresented groups or people maybe mentally checking out and stuff. And that can lead to some problems. And you lose some of the benefits of the shared learning can start to evaporate with that. Something I think that's key, if you have a facilitator, that can help. And maybe with some of those teams, injecting an outside facilitator in at different times. If from healthy teams that evolve naturally, and one of the practices that a lot of mob teams like to at least promote, and you've heard a lot, like, well, Falcon talk about, is the strong pairing concept, I think is key. And sometimes teams don't use that as much, but I really like that is, hey, if I have the idea, get away from the keyboard. But also, here's another thing, which is one of the patterns and practices, which I shared the link for remotemobprogramming.org, is one of the practices or patterns that they talk about is, this is group decision. It isn't just because you're the loudest. Somebody had talked about sometimes the loudest or, the most vocal. These are kind of group type decisions coming up, and it's collectively the shared experience, and roles are constantly evolving and changing. And so I really like what Elizabeth was sharing too about that. At any time we could do a little mini retrospective and experiment. We don't have to have a formal time. I always like to end with a little bit, a 5-minute or whatever, but anytime during the day doing those practices, I think was awesome suggestion.
Yeah, I think another suggestion I wanted to amplify was the setting of the rules and sort of like establishing why you're doing the mob and what the goal is, and having one of those goals be lowering the bus factor on this expert. I think can be something that everybody understands, of like, okay, we want this person to be able to take a sick day, to be able to do something else in the company, right? And realizing that, right, sharing their knowledge can be part of that, but having the other people sort of describe their intent and where they want to go and what their next instinct is for the next step, and working with that is important, right? If the person who knows the most is always driving, you're never going to learn for yourself.
And I can see that being really helpful for putting that expert, if they truly are an expert, kind of getting them in the right frame of mind for the goal is for them to teach, or rather the goal is for others to learn. That's that being more important. And so I'll get them to allow people to make mistakes. I saw somebody mention that in the chat, like, to encourage learning, help people make mistakes. That's really good. And I want to say, like, I really like how brilliant an idea it is to have retro in the middle. I can see it being really valuable for if you've only got somebody who that might be their only day they're rotating in, so you can at least get their input on how it would work better for them, and you can implement it for them. That can be really powerful for the experience. So that's brilliant.
So I'd like to
please, Woody.
introduce something on this. Early on, we had the guideline we would follow that, for an idea to go from somebody's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. And this was a very powerful thing. This was before we were mob programming. This was the mechanism that I'd learned from Llewellyn Falco about pair programming a few years earlier, and we had brought it into our coding dojo style. When we were learning together, we were all sitting at the computer learning together, and we were basically rotating out the pairs, everyone working on the same thing. So this basic concept allows us to include more people in the conversation. What we ask is, if you're at the keyboard, and if we're using a time rotation, but you're the only one who can contribute, what should we do next? You leave the keyboard. As I think Joe said a few minutes ago, you leave the keyboard and you guide the process. But what we found was there's something that we can use that's called navigating the navigators. So if there's one person with the ultimate amount of knowledge about this thing, their part of what they can do is break it apart so others can navigate the other parts. Break it into parts that others have sufficient knowledge to navigate on, or can be guided to navigate that part. One other tip is that if two people come up with an idea at the same time, two slightly different ideas or very different ideas, go for the more junior person's idea first. Let them try their idea. We're going to get more learning trying their idea. And we're often going to learn something that we wouldn't have an opportunity to do if we just directly solved the problem. Now, it seems like it's better to directly solve the problem, but this is what I've noticed, especially with people like me who are getting maybe a little too experienced in their careers. When you solve a problem using the knowledge you have, it turns into a pattern you use instead of an exploration you're doing. And you will often use a solution to solve too many slightly different problems where there might be better ways to come to it. So let's get those other voices in. If we really have a full team where we're across, all the functionality we need, we're going to have people with different levels of understanding and different levels of knowledge in everything we do. If we're working on a database thing, the database expert might be the best one to be guiding, but there will be other people who will have their ideas to interject. Same thing with the front end. And I love working with testers. I want to hear the testers' input on everything we do. I don't want to get to the end of something and then hand it off to a testing team and they come back and say, this is going to be really tough to test. I want to know that early on. How are we going to address the difficulty of this? So the testers are often focused differently than developers. Developers are often focused just on solving a current problem, whereas developers are looking at a bigger picture. How will this impact other things we already have? How will this impact the functionality of the program overall? So testers bring a different kind of mindset. I want all that in real time, not waiting to the different little phases. So we get that input. We ask for the input. If you have a facilitator, they'll be doing that. Say, hey, can we hear something from the tester on this? If the tester's reluctant to share right then because they're not understanding it, then we're exposing that we're not explaining things well. We want to learn that as we go. Please go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Woody. It is break time, and so I'm going to put up a slide for us to take a short break. And I encourage everyone to get up and stretch your legs, stretch out a little bit. And however, for those of you who are going to stick around, please continue to communicate with each other in the chat. And we will see you back here at 10 after the current hour. So I recognize the current hour is very different where you're at. So 10 minutes after the current hour is when we will be back. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And during this break, we would like to thank our sponsors. Our past sponsors have included Agile Alliance, Clean Coders, ClearLink, Bytes, Greater Sum, Leading Agile, Pluralsight, and Vistaprint. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, please reach out to Agile New England, and they can tell you how to get set up. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the slides. And for this portion of the discussion, we will be making things a little more fluid. We'll be allowing attendees to talk. And the way that's going to work is if you'd like to ask a question using your voice, then please raise your hand using the raise hand feature. Then you'll be able to ask a question using your voice. There were tons of amazing questions that came in during the first half, and my apologies that we were not able to get to all of them. I think there's way more questions than we had time for. However, if it's a question that's super pressing for you that you asked during the first half, please take the opportunity to ask it now. So look towards the attendees and see who wants to be first. But while we're waiting for attendees to raise their hands or for that to start working, so one question that people have had is like, what's a good resource for getting started, especially for teams where this might be completely new or they've never given this a try before? Where's a good place for people to get started?
Well, I'll kick that out, even though but you go to mobprogramming.org is the first main one that I think of, and that was the first, and it's got a ton of pointers and links and references. We put some others in there, but mobprogramming.org is a good place to start.
So I haven't been keeping that very updated. I probably will again, but it is a good starting spot because we captured a lot of our original thinking about this. Hopefully it's easy enough to navigate that site. I haven't been to it too much recently. I did write a book on this topic a couple, 3-4 years ago that's available through LeanPub, where I tried to capture what I teach in my workshops in written form. I'm not a very good writer, but I do know how to make an outline. So basically I kind of outlined what we do and kind of tried to explain my thinking on this. I think there's a lot of other materials available now. There are a few people that have written books. And if we are going to ask, how are we going to learn this? Then one thing is it's really simple. So don't make it a bigger thing. Don't think of it as being a bigger thing than it actually is. It's let's turn up the good on collaboration. How are we going to do that? So lots of people have used techniques. There's somebody wrote a book. I think it might be available almost for free on LeanPub as well, on remote mob programming. and they've got their tips and guidelines and stuff in there. It's a good book. And so, you know, you can gather a little bit and then just start giving a little try. I think the whole idea is that we want to up to good on collaboration. How are we going to do that?
Awesome. All right, Florian, apologies if I mispronounce anybody's name. My English lips have learned a few other languages over the years, but I'm not very good with them. So I'm going to allow you to talk and ask your question.
I think Florian's muted.
Yeah, you might be muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I have many questions actually, but I think I would like to ask one out of them. So my question would be, how fixed are the members of the team actually? So I have to say, I have no big experience with mob programming so far. So therefore, this question might be easily answered by you. Thank you.
Can I go first? It's a good question, because there isn't really a number. It's more who needs to be in mob. Like we have the team that we mob together. Sometimes we have stakeholders, and anyone that needs to be in the mob that has knowledge. So it really depends. But the thumb rule is if you are more than 2 people, then it's a mob.
Which I would just add too, because I remember I saw a reply from Morty on a tweet once where they said, "Oh, you need at least 3," and he said, "We never made that rule." So I mean, so even pairing could be the very minimal of mobbing, but yeah, I generally like 4 or 5 because that way, if a couple of us are gone or missing out, but I really like what Leah said. It can grow and shrink depending on whatever adds value at that time, and that inspecting and adapting whoever we need.
We have a couple heuristics that we had used originally, although our team was a very fixed team. It was the programmers that were on a particular team that stumbled upon this idea of working together, and we didn't have the flexibility to change this team in any way. So our first guideline was, if you feel you're not contributing or learning something, you might go work on something alone for a while. The second heuristic was, if we are blocked with a question we can't answer on the team itself, that means we're either missing the knowledge or we're missing somebody, and we would go find that somebody. And if we found ourselves getting blocked frequently on that same question or that same knowledge area, that would pretty much tell us we probably need another team member, somebody who's got that knowledge area. Originally, I really wanted to have, I believe in, you know, a completely cross-functional team. We should have the DevOps skills, the database skills, the programming skills, the testing skills, the product owner skills. And in reality, everybody will have some bits of what everyone else has, so the contribution can become very full, but the size of the team could grow and shrink. But I want to make it clear, one of the big advantages of mob programming is having a shared memory across the team. We have a shared memory that when we start losing that shared memory, things can become a little harder. So I don't want to see for myself a team changing too much, but it still can be a very dynamic thing. So I would say either of these, any of these ideas, there is no hard and fast rule. I'm going to paint one more picture for you. If you could make 5 or 6 people work as if it was one highly knowledgeable, highly capable person, there's an advantage to that. So that from my own brain, if I'm working on something alone that I know everything about it, I get the knowledge I need immediately because it's all stored in this one little silly looking container. But if you go across a mob programming team, some of that info is going to be stored in other places. Let's think of how can we make it flow as well as we could if that knowledge was all contained in a single brain. We now have a brain made up of 5 or 6 brains. How do we get good at using that? We need to figure that out. There's no hard rule. It must be this way or it must be that way. I hope that was helpful. Go ahead,
Elizabeth.
Sure. I have found that in adding new people to the mob, it helps to have everyone on the same page, have some ground rules, have a sort of why are we doing this? What's the goal focus, or sharing sort of that asking questions and the learning and sort of stopping to make sure that you're explaining things and everyone's involved is part of it. And like getting everyone on that page makes it so that, yeah, people like understand how to jump in and know where to jump in, and that can increase your mob. One thing I found with the mob that I'm a part of is that people would come at the appointed time and say, oh, I actually can't join today because I'm working on this thing. And then almost always we'd be like, okay, let's work on that thing together, right? That would be one way to increase the size and to, yeah, make sure that people are getting the value out of it.
That's a beautiful approach. I love that.
Yeah, and one thing that, and I actually shared the link to the first Agile Alliance experience report that Woody had written in 2014, but something that's in there, and it's very good write-up too, to actually get a good understanding from that. And one point that, as Woody was putting in there, was they try that high-level communication. They definitely, when they were doing it on site, they would try to get physically the person there. If they couldn't, the next thing was to do it through Skype, Hangout, whatever, Zoom. And then if that didn't happen, then they would try voice somehow, you know, talking to them on the phone or whatever. The last form of communication, you know, maybe Slack or whatever, but the last form of communication was email, you know, email if all else fails from trying to get that other expert thing. But they really wanted that live interaction, and even with a shared screen, because it's occasionally they had to do some things remotely, even then when they were in the same physical place.
How big is too big? Has anybody hit that limit yet, or discovered that upper limit?
We've had as many as 14 in one team.
I will say this is just my experience with the numbers. When you start getting more than 7, when you start getting up to 10, there's usually 1 or 2 people that aren't participating as much. And there's been a lot of scientific research validating that, that even when you get into different group discussions and things like, so whenever even I do workshops or stuff, whether it's mobbing or something else, trying to not have the groups too big can help promote more people interacting. But sometimes you might need a bigger group for doing some of the things. I've seen groups as big as like what he said, but generally, you know, I've seen some of the best productivity and benefits, and people seem to interact and having fun and getting the best out of it was, you know, 5 to 7, somewhere in there. You know, 4 is good too.
Yeah, I think it's not that easy to say a number, what is the biggest possibility, but I think, like you already said, when it's getting too difficult to organize all the ideas of the participants, then maybe you've raised the highest number. So it's not easy to say, yeah, 7 is the highest or 10. You have to try it, and maybe for your team 14 is okay. So I also had a mob with 40 that it was okay, but I think for my team 20 were too much, for example. So it's not that easy. You have to try it out with your team. What's the best for your team?
Something I remember from the before times was that it was really hard to book a conference room and get enough chairs and make sure that people could all see. That used to be our limit.
Interesting. So that's not your limit anymore, obviously. Lillian, I see that you've raised your hand. I'm going to click the button to allow you to talk. So please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, okay, thank you. So is there a time that you have seen any value on someone working by himself for whatever reason? Or is it always 100% mobbing every day, all day?
I feel like that's a flipped around version of how I usually hear that question. So yeah, so I'm curious.
There's always.
The reason I'm asking is because I have some. This is new. We are not mobbing at all with my team, but I would like them to. And there's always a little bit of questions and opposition, you know. So I'm trying to just give them more information, maybe. And
I want to make it clear then, mob programming doesn't replace solo working. Mob programming adds an option to the way we typically think about working. We happen to end up full-time all day long working as a team, and individuals would still go off and work it alone whenever they felt it was appropriate to go work alone. It adds an option. It's not an exclusive thing, that it eliminates pair programming or solo programming. Some people want to think about certain things alone, and they will do better with that. And sometimes I love to program alone, by the way. I program every day still, and I love to do it alone. I also love to do it with groups. It doesn't replace that. Leah, you were starting to say something.
I love you. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Leah.
No, sure. Sorry. Wait. What was the question again? Sorry.
So working solo, the idea of...
oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So we sometimes go, there's this model called the Cannibal Model. So if everyone on the team knows the problem and knows how to fix it, then you can choose, you can do it in mob or you can just do it solo. So the more complex and complicated the problem is, or that you need to knowledge share, and then we always do mob. But I mean, sometimes it's not really useful to be in a mob if you're in a bad mood, or sometimes it's really better to do it solo. And so we usually do that in our team. Like, oh, it's like really not good at all. It's too hot or something. It's like, I need to do some solo. It's like, spare you. And so maybe at that time, it's better for this person to do solo. So.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out, just because I recently wrote with some people that are, doing mobbing full time, some various patterns that we talked about addressing some of this. And so we called them swarming patterns, but and when you think of swarming, we can all swarm together on solving the thing, and mobbing is like swarming to the extreme from that perspective. And so 3 of the patterns we had, and I wrote with some other colleagues for one of the patterns conferences we did about 1.5 years ago, is we had one called branch out. So sometimes with smaller impediments, there might be a small impediment. You don't need the whole team working on that. So you say, okay, Leah and Mira, could you go take care of these small impediments? And then, so they may leave the mob and come back. Maybe they're pairing and doing it, or maybe individually or whatever. So that was one. And sometimes there's cross-cutting concerns. So there's something going across a big thing. And so then we have another pattern we call, and I'll gladly, anybody that wants to send me a message in, Twitter, whatever, share the paper that we wrote on this. It's called spread out. And so for cross-cutting concern, you solve it as a group, what it should be. And now it's like, we're going to take the mob team and, okay, maybe pair up, or we're all going to spread out and individually attack this, then come back as a mob team. And then the last one, which was my favorite, it's keep one in the dark. And so what that is sometimes we get groupthink. And I think people should do this whether they're mobbing or not, even with any team I'm part of. So we start getting groupthink, and pretty soon we can almost answer each other, or say, we're almost finishing each other's sentences. So sometimes to prevent that, occasionally have one person abandon the swarm, abandon the mob until a certain task or set of tasks is finished. And maybe I go join another team. Maybe I'm swarming or mobbing with them. And then maybe have another person join. That other person joined is questioning us. So it gets it, and maybe we have a good reason why we're doing it, but at least it gets us out. And so we have to kind of explain it well, and then challenge us from that group thing. And then the person that left, they come back with new ideas, maybe from the other team. And so these were some different types of, from some people that I've worked with in industry that's been mobbing full time, found that occasionally doing some of these patterns are a good practice to also include, which occasionally will have some solo type things going on with that. I just wanted to at least share that. And I'll find a link if I have time before we finish and put it in the chat on this.
Elizabeth, you had something to share?
Yeah, I was just thinking both about what Joe was saying and earlier about sort of involving experts. And I wanted to, make it clear that junior people are great in a mob because they ask the questions that you are sort of on autopilot for. and the way that you've set it up, right? You may be like, okay, we're gonna go do this thing, let me just log in. And they may ask, wait, why are we using this user? Is this the right URL? Right, just sort of all the things that you take for granted, being able to step back and ask if that's the right thing, and maybe go down that tangent if that's what really needs to be discovered.
I've also discovered from time to time, thinking I'm the expert, and then the more junior person asks a question for like, and their question is basically, why are you doing this the hard way? And like, I didn't realize I was doing it the hard way. I'm doing it the way I've always done it, but now there's an easier way, and the junior person knows it, but I don't. And so I think that's really valuable as well.
Yes, I think the more time that experts spend in mobs, the more they will realize they are not the expert in everything.
Or even if they still are the experts, even the experts get stuck, and then the junior person challenging them, then the experts say, oh, wait, there is a better way. Okay, this is why we were doing it, but now that you get me thinking. So sometimes that happens as well. Yeah.
Kaylee, you are up next to ask a question. I've allowed you to speak and unmuted you. Or please unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, how is everyone? This is Khalid Ward. How you guys doing? Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yep.
So I'm a big proponent of mobbing. When I introduce it, I typically it's very rare that I get a team that like wants to do it. You usually get a lot of pushback. And one of the things is like, you'll hear teams say that even tried it, is like, yo, we can't mob everything, right? And I understand that. Sometimes they got to fill out forms that they need to do. And it's like, mobbing is a waste of the resources. I have yet to have a team become like my mobbing team and mob the entire sprint. And like I disagree with one of the, well, I don't want to say I disagree. I have an alternate opinion about like, all right, so people be like, all right, mobbing, you should really do it when like it's a tough task that we need to tackle together. I'm being a coach, I challenge that. I'm like, why can't we mob everything? Why can't we mob the easy stuff too? Knock that out and just go. So I'm guessing my question is, what am I asking? I guess I'm trying to get my first like mobbing team that mobs everything. Knowing that we can break free from the mob, whenever you need to, like you say, if you're having in a bad mood, or we need somebody to be the gopher and go look up something, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But have any of you had teams that just are the mobbing team? And how did you get it to that point where they went from, all right, we're gonna mob this sprint, like this one story, to the point where they're like, we're gonna mob everything? How did you get to that plateau?
That's a great question. Who wants to take that one? Leah?
Okay, I'll go. Well, actually, my team, they sort of handpicked us to mob. And they said that we should like mob everything. We can mob everything. So we had this period of extreme mobbing when we mobbed absolutely everything. I mean, the only time for yourself was probably at the bathroom. But it was kind of tiring as well. But we also had a coach. So we had a coach and we had the support from the organization. And we all had experience from mobbing before, and we knew that this is like, we can mob everything. No one's gonna actually say that we can't. But that's not like going from doing just complicated problems to just everything. Our like team was designed to mob, so it's different. So I don't have experience on how you go from some mobbing to everything mobbing, like in our team.
Yeah, I also don't have experience doing mobbing all of the time. What I can say is we have tried doing easy tasks, right? You were saying that you only have the inclination, or people are really motivated to mob when it seems like a hard thing and you can't do it alone. But I think, as Scott was saying too, right? discovering that you've been doing things the hard way on an easy task, or that there's some better way to do it, is worth mobbing on. I have mobbed on adding expenses in Concur and just making sure that you get all those fields right with the credit card, right? Like, it is the most boring thing, and it would not be a thing you would think to practice on. But practicing describing what you want to do versus sort of what exactly the keystrokes are, making sure that the other person is driving, right? It can be good to practice on something simple like that to get used to it, so that when you're in a hard situation, you have the skills and the patterns.
Yeah, and you know, something I've seen, I mean, actually one of the things, and Woody can validate whether this is true or not, but when I went to Hunter, it felt like they were doing mobbing on everything all the time, full time, even on the simple tasks. But sometimes the complicated tasks are a chance that maybe we want one or two people to go off and do a spike solution and then bring it back into the mob. So maybe I would even do the opposite sometimes as well. I mean, that's a great question, by the way. I love the discussion on it, because we can mob almost anything at any time. And it's really up to the team with what adds value, forming into getting all the great minds together, to working together as part of what Woody's quote from the mobbing, what mobbing is.
I'd like to interject something here as well. We originally could see the value of mob programming on the big problems and on the complicated stuff, even though almost immediately after the first day, we accidentally started doing this in a 2-hour section. In that 2-hour session, at the end of it, we were kicked out of the room because somebody else had booked the room we had. Somebody on the team stood up and said, let's just go find another room. We almost instantly realized we wanted to keep doing this. When we went to that other room, somebody on the team then said, well, why don't we just book rooms for the afternoon so we don't have to go back to our cubicles to find out where we're going in the afternoon. So we booked rooms right then. We could see the value of all of us being together. At the end of the day, we did a retrospective, a quick 5-minute retrospective. As a team, what went well today? I was working with them as well. They said these 4 things. Boy, we got a lot done. I learned a lot. It was fun and interesting, and the quality was really high. Those 4 things we recognized the very first day, and then I would have traditionally asked, well, what do you want to do about this to turn up the good on it tomorrow? And they all said, let's just find some rooms right now, rather than book them at the last minute, get a chance for having more time in the room. By the end of the week, we were finding rooms that were empty much of the day, so we could be together all day. As we went along, we realized that people would split off to work on the simple stuff. And after a while, the team said, why don't we look at it as a team first and then decide whether they should split off? And what we found was many of the simple tasks could be automated. That elevates the problem from being some boring rote work into being an intriguing automation problem, which is what programmers do all day anyways. We're automating processes for other people. This was a big win for us. So I've now worked with literally hundreds of teams. Some of them start right off going full-time, 8 hours a day, the teams all together. Some of them bring little bits of it. They only work on bugs together or whatever. There's no one way to do it. I would invite those who really want to participate. Say, is there a group of folks here that maybe would want to join in on an all-day, every-day mob and see how that goes? If you can get the volunteers to do that, that may be a way to get that kicked off as well. So, there's many let's have another session someday where we cover specifically some of these topics, because there is so much to cover here. That was a great thing to explore.
I think very important is when you try to go to almost mob everything, is that everyone is okay with it and everyone wants to mob almost everything, because it's not good to force someone to do a mob every day. So first thing you have to be sure is that everyone is okay with trying out to do mob almost everything. I think that's the most important thing you have to be sure for at the beginning.
Yeah, so you could pose it as an experimentation. Well, let's experiment or explore this. But still, even with our team, at any time, someone could simply say, I'm going to go work alone for a while. There was never any scrutiny of that. You always have the option to split off, work alone, or work with a pair. Say, hey, the 2 of us should go look at this together. There's no scrutiny of it. We call this the following the intent of the team members. So if a team member expresses an intent and there's no really strong reason to not do that thing, it's just done. This gives safety to each team member. If a team member can say, I think we got to sleep on this, and nobody else says, no, we got to finish this through right now, then we'll pick it up again tomorrow and work on something else, because we recognize that sometimes you're too deep into something, leave it alone. But that's just an example. I'm just saying, if a team member expresses an intent, like, let's go find another room and keep working this way, and nobody has a real compelling reason not to do it, we follow the intent of that team member. That is a good way to build a real team. So I can go on and on that one. We'll have another session someday. Yeah.
Thanks for such a thought-provoking question, Kaylee Ward. I'm going to go ahead and disable talking for you, and we will take Eric Soa's question. I've allowed you to talk. Please unmute yourself when you're ready.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. A lot of the teams that I see that could benefit most from turning up the collaboration good are emotionally resistant to terms like mob programming and pair programming. And the one thing I see that they are doing that is a collective endeavor, or at least on the surface, is what we call blitzing. It's like end-to-end exploratory testing before a release goes out to make sure that we find all the bugs and fix them. And earlier in this panel, the term mob testing came up, and I'm curious about mob testing as a gateway. How could I go in and turn the blitz, which is really only collaborative on a surface, to mob testing, and then sort of get into mob bug fixing, and then maybe eventually into mob creation without mentioning mob before people are ready for the word?
Sure, I can just jump in there. I didn't call it this, but I did a blitz yesterday. Yeah, so we were building a thing that went sort of across a few teams, and yeah, we found a time to get sort of the testers on each of the teams together to ask thoughtful questions. And we, in this session, because it was the first time we did it for this particular product release, had sort of each of us driving for like 10, 15 minutes on the piece of the product that was ours, and then we would pass it off to the next person. What I want to try next time is saying, oh, the passing back and forth didn't work that well. Can we, or like, sort of, I want to make sure that other people are involved, or can they sort of share the keyboard and like sort of slip it in that way and just give someone access in Zoom to control my machine or the other person's machine, depending on how that works. But yeah, I think Woody was saying this earlier too, sort of like baby steps without calling it mobbing might get you there. Yeah,
just to follow up on that a little bit, first of all, I really like the term blitzing as well. That's kind of interesting. So a lot of times I might use, that's why I use the term swarming at times. We're going to swarm to solve this, getting the right people. But blitzing, I kind of like that way of looking at it. It almost reminds me refactoring in the early days. When we were pushing refactoring, the R word was considered a bad word. So we just didn't use it. But it's like, okay, to add this new feature, we need to extract this out over here, pull this, and we put the new feature in. Well, that is refactoring, but we just didn't use the R word. Well, why are you rewriting or whatever, you know? But now refactoring it's considered part of most Agile practices. Martin Fowler did a good job of marketing it for us and selling it. And it's become part of the mindset of most organizations. So we can go ahead and use it. But same way with do whatever adds value and call it whatever you want. Hey, let's all just get together and do this, or let's blitz on it. So I really like that, Eric. But yeah, I mean, sometimes those terms cause problems. Ooh, mob programming, I need to go have some formal training by Woody before I start, and we swarm or whatever type. No, let's just get together and let's try to work on this together to solve the problem. I think that's the main thing, is to add what adds value.
I'm curious how many of us who are on the panel got started doing mob testing before they did mob for any other activity. Is that something we have represented? Okay, Elizabeth, Mira. So Mira, how did that kind of expand to other mobbing activities for you?
I'm not sure if I get the question right.
So I guess in my question was an assumption that your team does more than just mob testing now. Does your team do activities other than just testing in a mob?
Yeah, of course. So I started introducing mobs by mob testing, and then we had these mob testing sessions, and of course we found bugs, and then we tried, after a few sessions, we tried out to directly fix the bugs in another session directly after the testing sessions. So maybe for example 1 hour testing session, and then 1 hour bug fixing session directly after the testing session. And then we came from mob testing sessions to mob programming sessions. Then that was a way we developed in the team. Yeah. Does this answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off talking for you, and we will hear from another Eric, Eric Hoos. You are now allowed to talk. Please unmute yourself when you're ready and ask your question.
Okay, cool. So I was just curious, everyone's on the panel, their experience or opinions of using mobbing to solve not only just coding problems, but also maybe organizational problems or teamwork problems, because I think a lot of us have been at places where a team is nothing more than a collection of people who share stand-up and ceremonies together, and also places where QA is like a handoff to another group of people. But mobbing seems to help solve some of that. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of your experiences with that.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, Leah, please.
Yeah, since we mob from our sort of normal process is we have like a problem. We need to understand the problem and then go to what's the best solution for it. So we discover different solutions. And usually if you're a cross-functional team, you do handoffs perhaps between like design and implementing. But since we do everything more or less collaborative, not always in a strict mob, but we do collaborative activities all the time. It means that everyone on the team knows why we are doing a certain thing. They know about the problem. They know why we have to solve it, instead of they are sort of experiencing the problem rather than me telling them. And so it also means that I can be away, and the team still just is like self-sufficient. I mean, of course, I'm still the expert. I have my expertise, but still, just not for me, not that I don't have to micromanage everything is like super great. And well, so yeah, I mean, there are many benefits in many senses. Of course, it's challenging as well. If you like to own your solution, not like share it with others or things like that. But in my case, I am really driven by getting out the value to our users, and not that I'm going to get that value, but we as a team.
Awesome.
Working together all the time puts a magnifying glass on the existing relationships and problems and way that you're working. And that can be really good if you then are able to resolve it and have the energy and self-reflection skills to be able to do that. I don't think that mobbing inherently solves all of those problems. It can help expose them. One thing I can say about the mob that I've been a part of is that we were pulling people from different teams to all come together. And so it did create a sense of community in a way that we didn't have without it, where we could go, even outside the mob, ask questions of each other, pair on things, know that somebody else had that shared memory to say, oh, how did we do that again when you need to do it by yourself?
I'd like to throw something in too. As far as improving processes and improving other things, you can do mob activities around those things. But one thing that happens almost automatically, and I share it from my very first talks on this, is a lot of the problems that teams express to me that they're having when they're not working in a mob programming manner start to fade away or just automatically disappear when we turn up the good on collaborating well, when we're focused on collaborating well. So just to give an example of why I think this happens, if one of the team members is especially good at smoothing over or getting us through a problem, the others start getting that skill too. It's just like if you're raised in a family where everyone's kind of polite to each other, I've heard about that. And if you have a family where everybody's kind of polite to each other, then as the kids that are growing up in that family, they learn to be polite to each other. It's because the environment around them is helping them learn models of being effective. So what we noticed early on, and I started in my very first talks, maybe from my second or third talk on in 2012 and 2013 about this, was that we made a list, I've done this as an exercise, of all the things that get in the way of us being effective, and that a lot of those just disappeared or faded away when we turned up the good on collaborating well, when we have the attitude that we're here to help each other, when we're a helping organization, where we're focused on making it easy for others to work with us. Teamwork isn't something we get out of the team. It's not the result. Teamwork is skills that we bring to the team and our willingness to work well on a team. And if we have members that aren't willing to do that, they'll automatically learn some of that from the team members who do have that. Now, there's some who are going to be very disruptive, and maybe they will never work well on a team. Not everything automatically works for everybody. We've had team members that could not learn to work well with others. There's no perfect solution to anything, but I think mob programming of itself provides this environment where we can make these improvements. Let's make sure we're focused on learning to collaborate well. Again, this would be a good topic for another session sometime in the next few months. Leah.
No, I completely agree with you. It's about collaboration. And I'm thinking that our team is, in a way, 3 years old, but only, I think, 3 of us are like original members. But we still do mob, and all the members that come in are like new family members. They know that, okay, so we are, we work a lot with like positive bias, things like some sort of rules when you build on each other's ideas, and things like that the new family members just learn when they are onboarded. So even though it's not the same team as 3 years ago, we still have sort of like the same values, I guess I can say.
I like that.
Yeah, and something that I really like that kind of follows up with that Elizabeth was talking about, that magnifying glass was the analogy I think mentioned, is it helps make sure that I am following the values. So when I have that, it's like, okay, by myself, maybe I'm going to get lazy now. Oh, Joe, we're supposed to write a test. Come on, that's a pretty long function you have there. It's getting kind of ugly, or have we named things well? So having that magnifying glass kind of helps focus. Just like if I'm even better, like if I'm doing exercise with other people, having that magnifying glass to keep me. So anything I do, it helps with that.
It keeps us honest. It keeps us from backsliding on the things we know we should be doing. So I think that's a great thing. That's really good.
Very good. Tim Nolan, if you can hear us, I can see that you have your hand raised, but it seems like you're flashing in and out. I'm going to attempt to allow you to talk. Well, you disappeared again. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and go with Tatiana Rosa. You're allowed to talk. Eric Hoos, thank you for your thought-provoking question.
Oh, yes. Hello, everyone. I am teaching a course for developing complex systems, where we are encouraging the students to do mobbing programming. and use other agile practices. But the students are having difficulties to do this remotely. So in your opinion, what are good practices to start to do mobbing programming remotely? Thanks.
Thank you, Tati. First of all, I want to say something. Shout out to Tati, because Tati's one of my friends from Brazil. I wore my Brazil shirt. I'm definitely missing being there. So thanks for bringing that up. She's actually at USP, the University of Sao Paulo. And I've even done some mob experiments at their XP lab, where they try a lot of that stuff. And so when we did that, definitely the physical side. So I think bringing up some of the remote challenges is a very good point, because trying to get people learning it together, especially if they've never done it before, and that maybe having the moderator and having a lot of mini breaks. And there was something that was even in the chat earlier that I liked, is maybe you start off and we'll have some little 1 hour exercises doing some of it with some moderation going on with that, or some different experiences that you can do with that. But anyway, it's good to see you part of this, Tati. Definitely thanks for the good question. I'm sure there's some other good dialogue or discussion on that as well.
Yeah, maybe you can try to teach remote mobbing by using a very simple topic, not directly the code. So, for example, use a quiz or a puzzle or something like that to solve in the mob, to get the team familiar with mobbing. The topic is not the main point in this situation then, and just to get familiar with the remote situation and with mobbing. And when you tried that out, then you can focus later on mobbing code or something like that. I think that's maybe a good idea to start with.
I like that. I'm glad you brought that up. I worked with a team recently where they couldn't really work all day. There was too many responsibilities, and they wanted still to learn a little bit about mob programming. And we chose to work on some bugs, because bugs are often really self-contained. You know, two things about bugs is, you know, you have a problem, and you know that there's something that isn't working in a very specific manner. So that's not as open-ended as adding a feature and so on. So just simply working on bugs, they only had a team of 3 to 4 people. We'd get together, nail a bug as quick as we could. And the point of a bug also is that you can go from beginning to end on it, usually pretty directly. So it gives you a self-contained thing you can work on that will get done within a session or two if you have the right people there. So finding similar things to work on can be one way to introduce it a little bit. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but that really reminded me of this concept of finding something that's nicely self-contained, but also working on exercises together, I think, is a powerful thing. We need to learn the skills of interacting, and it interferes with learning those skills if we're trying to solve difficult live problems in our code or features we're trying to add, because the pressure of getting the work keeps us from focusing so much on learning about learning well to work well together.
Awesome. So I think so Tim, I believe, was having connection difficulties. Oh, and thank you, Tati, for the thought-provoking question. I'm gonna disable your talking for now. But I think the question Tim may have been trying to ask, because I see one in the chat, is what does the panel think about continuing to virtual mob when we all return to work after COVID-19? So I'm very interested to hear what people think about this one. So Leah, you first.
Okay. Well, so we've been working remote since the first week of March or something. We went early in quarantine because our workplace. But so in the beginning, it's kind of hard. Now there are new routines, and there are actually good things on remote programming, like we can actually see the code, everyone now. Before we had like a big screen, and I mean, I have glasses, but still it's difficult. Now I can actually see everything on my screen. But we have been talking about it at the whole workplace. Are we going to have like days where we actually come in, or are we going to have days where we actually do stuff remote? We haven't decided on it. But I think people are actually quite happy that they can have this opportunity, this possibility to work remote. One in my team, she's like always somewhere in Sweden. You never know where she is. It's like the question of the day: where are you today? So I think we would like to be perhaps some way together, but I mean co-located. But we also, I think, appreciate that we can be remote as well. So I guess the answer is I don't really know. We will take the best from two worlds, sort of.
I definitely want to add something, because I've one company I worked with in Brazil, in Vilia, I'll put a shout out to them, Araraquara, where they have the best coxinha in the world, in my opinion, the golden coxinha place. But one of the things is they've been working remote. They make a remote a big part of their company a long time ago. And that's why even when I've taught workshops there and things like that, half the people would be remote. And for them, they don't want to limit themselves by not getting good people because they are remote. So they put a lot of energy into doing that. And so, but even then, one of the patterns that they had, and something looking forward to, is still having people come together and get physically in person once we can, because there is something about that relationship building. It's much harder in this environment, though having some practices. Maybe we're going to have a happy hour on Friday, we'll all do coffee or beer or whatever your pleasure is on that. One of my friends from Brazil, where they do mobbing a lot, from Nubank, he said after this pandemic, they're going to have a happy hour every day to kind of catch up with some of this. But still, but a lot of organizations I'm talking to and experience is allowing for a lot of that and bringing a lot of these good practices that we've learned. And now we don't need to limit ourselves to having so much physical. We could still have some of the best minds from anywhere in the world by doing that. Now, of course, when you're in different time zones, you still have a lot of challenges, because I have worked where I've been here in the Midwest time zone. We had some of our team members were in China or India and stuff, and trying to sync up. Either we were way early and they were way late, but we find ways to work around that when we needed to swarm together with different time zones.
Awesome. Anyone else? Woody?
So I believe this is the same thing of the question of mob programming against solo programming or pair programming. We now, everybody's going to have a lot more experience and be able to make a better decision about which way do we want to be. And in some situations, I've had to work remotely. There was just no option. I think we're going to see more options to work remotely. Most of the time throughout my career, you didn't have an option to work remotely. You had to work at home. So, I mean, to work in the office, because that's how they had set things up. I believe there's advantages to both, and I don't think we need to limit ourselves to one or the other. We can find many mix and match. How does it work with this company? How's it going to work with that company? This is just opening up our choices. Was I answering the right question? I'm starting to get a little bit, okay, good.
I think so. That's a question that, yeah, your question seems to fit with your answer seems to fit with the question. So awesome. So, so we had another question, also from Tim, which I think this is the one he meant to ask. So I asked one he had tried to ask earlier. So we have a team that has worked together for many years, 10 years. We were a Scrum team at first. We eventually just went through the motions of Scrum. We tried mob programming last August and have not looked back. We feel mob programming is the evolution of Scrum. Has that been the experience of anyone on the panel? So
I agree.
Okay. Awesome. Seeing thumbs up. Yeah, it's kind of a yes or no.
So
Awesome.
I think that pair programming was great, and that this is just a slight step beyond pair programming. It's not a big step to go from 2 to 3 or 4. So the basic concepts are just typical Agile concepts. I don't know if I would speak about sprints as much as just the Agile concepts. This is a slight new expansion or addition to other Agile thinking.
Yeah, maybe relay races instead of sprints. Like, kind of passing the baton for, yeah.
Somebody shared, that's a good point, because somebody shared this with me recently. What we're trying to do is not run faster. We're trying to shorten the distance we need to run. And I really like that, because when we're doing mob programming, the way I like to see it done is we're going to work on one thing at a time, and we're going to go from beginning to end on that one thing in this next few sessions, hopefully even not more than a day. And what that allows us to do is not have all the context switching and queuing and waiting and inventory that happens when we split the parts of that thing up and have different people work on it. There's a lot of ways to explain this. We'll do that in another session sometime. But that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things I dislike about one of the terms in Sprint, and I've even been involved recently where we had 96 Scrum patterns written recently with Jeff Sutherland and Copeland and others. But the word sprint in itself is kind of counterintuitive, because you get tired out after sprint, whereas we're trying to do a marathon and last for the long term and stuff. So kind of pace ourselves and working and the constant collaboration. And you don't need a daily stand up when you're, because you're all together kind of working there. And then even the code reviews, you minimize a lot of the needs for that. You can still get different feedback from other parts of the company and have I work with one of the companies I was talking about in Brazil called Nubank, where they still have a ways of putting that out for feedback, but the team swarming on it have already given it a lot of feedback, and a lot of eyes are already looking at what's going on.
Great point.
Yeah, and even a marathon runner knows when the race is going to be over, but I feel like that's not true for a lot of the work that we do.
Yeah.
Done is a very nebulous concept.
Yes, so sustainability becomes really, really important. It's not a matter, writing this code or whatever it is we're doing isn't an event based thing. It is a very different thing. If we get to the end, but it's different where we thought we wanted to go to in the beginning, that's a bonus that we get out of working this way. What we thought we wanted is often not what we really wanted. So we're in a process of discovery, and enhancing our ability to discover is an important part of software development. And I think mob programming enhances that or makes that even better.
Yeah. Right. I mean, because even with Scrum is supposed to be the continuous feedback loop, inspect and adapt and all that. Well, that becomes very, very short with mobbing.
Yes, right. That's right.
Kaylee, I see, Kaylee Ward, I see you have another question.
Yeah, so this is more of a comment to try to add some more value to the conversation as opposed to a question. There are some things that I've learned, like coaching the mobbing sessions, that I just wanted to pass on to everybody. First of all, I just want to say that the retrospective at the end of the day is very important. And I remember you guys kind of loosely covered that, but I wanted to bring that back up. That 5 to 15 minute retro is critical. Here are some examples. I had one kid say to me, he's like, "Khalid, I love mobbing, but I hate the way the table is angled." So they had the big screen TV, and then the table is perpendicular to the TV as opposed to parallel to it. He was like, "So I hate when it's my turn to be on the keyboard and I got to turn my neck and look at the screen." So I came in early the next morning and just turned the table around. We thought the table was like nailed to the floor, and I turned it around. Nobody ever thought to do that. So now when they sit, everybody's facing the screen. They're like so much better. Same team. Another kid said, "I'm so used to working on at my desk with dual screens." He was like, "I love mobbing, but I hate that we only have this one large TV screen." So the exec said, "Khalid, just go steal a monitor from off one of the desks where nobody's sitting." They're like, "Stop asking to do stuff and just do it." So I just went and stole a monitor, We connected it to the TV, and then they had their double monitors. You know,
That's great.
It's the comments from the retro are so critical. Like, you know, it's that little bit of change that we can knock out. And one more thing, what you guys said in the beginning, the working agreements that come up for the working agreements for the mob in the beginning. So I like to start with this sentence. Every team I coach, I start with this sentence and have them complete it. We work best together when. Then we draw a line, have them complete the sentence. And a lot of times the sentence ends like when we're uninterrupted, when we can, you know, collaborate together and everybody's listening to each other, when we resolve our impediments quickly, something like that. So we start with that, with the working agreements, and let them agree. I had one person who was like a mobbing expert, like visit our mob. And he's like, so how are you guys like rotating on the keyboard or whatever? So what we were doing was, the way I was originally taught was, like, they pick a time that they want to work in the working agreement. So everybody gets 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And the guy questioned it. He was like, why are you guys doing the same time every time? He was like, you know, you can randomize it. He was like, oh, never even thought of that. So we started randomizing it. So this person might get 10 minutes, then this person gets 15 minutes, then this person might get 5 minutes. And then the team retroed that. It was like, all right, we should make a minimum of what the minimum time is, because I hate like getting into it and only got 5 minutes, because that's what the randomizer said. So it's like, all right, we'll make the randomizer, the lowest it can be is 10, and the most it can be is like 20 or whatever the team picked. So we started playing with the quote rules of what can be done, and just made little improvements for the teams after that. So it's cool to be like you guys said, exploratory, to take chances, do things like that, mess around with the rules. There's nothing etched in stone. Anybody can leave the mob when they need to, like you guys are saying, and just have fun with it. And when you listen to the team, that's one thing I've learned. When you listen to them and make those changes that they want, and they feel like their voices are being heard, they are more likely to follow you as a leader. You know what I mean? Because as a coach, what you're trying to do is get the team to do what you want them to do without telling them what to do. Like, collaborate well, like you guys said. They're more likely to do that and want to do that because, like, they are actually seeing their retro action items being completed. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to add some stuff in there. Like,
no, those are great additions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for sharing all those great tidbits. That was awesome. And it gets back to, like, anything you want to improve with, that experimentation. I appreciate that, Ward. I mean, if you're master chef, you're constantly experimenting, trying to improve. Same way with musician, trying different things, and that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we work together. Best one is awesome. So
sorry.
Go on, Mira. Yeah.
An idea that comes to my mind is that I never tried that by my own, but I heard about that. Now during that pandemic situation, that the colleagues with kids let the kids have a mob session before they start with their mob, and maybe that's a good idea to get new ideas from the kids. So they have a 15 minutes mob before the original mob will start, and just maybe that's a good idea to get new ideas from the kids, how they act in a mob. Maybe that's a way. Well, it's an idea you can try out if you are working at home with your kids. So at the moment.
Yeah. No, that has instantly wheels turning about what I might try this evening. So. Thank you, Koli. Those were great comments. So I'm going to go ahead and disable talking for you now. And then open it up for, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Deshur. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, that's just a combination of part of my name. So I have a question about a team I have that's very cross-functional. I have 5 core members and 3 part-time people come in and out as needed. The 5 core members, I only have 2 developers, and we've been working on a lot of work that isn't strictly development work, but within our corporation, we have to work through So the compliance, and we have a call center expert and a data analyst. So how might you use mobbing with a team that that we don't do a lot of coding yet, but we will need to do it. So we have 2 developers on the team. What might you do with a team like that? I'm really passionate about mobbing, and I want to see how I could bring those techniques to our team.
Super. Yeah. Leah or Elizabeth, do either of you?
Yeah. So if I understood the question, so these developers, they are doing not like coding, like they're not programming at the moment. Is that correct?
It's correct that they're not doing much. We're just starting. So the developers now have enough tasks that they're mainly doing development now, but everybody's very used to working on their own sections, although they do pair, or even 3 people will work on the UI front end, for example. But we never do something all together. And we're very often trying to work the compliance through the corporation and work on these other things.
So how do you, so if you are a cross-functional team, how do you solve like between different roles in the team today? So what I'm thinking is to start to collaborate in different ways. It mustn't start with a mob, but so how do you work today in how are you collaborating today in the cross-functional team? Do you have things that you collaborate, or is it more handoffs?
We do have good collaboration. So, but at most we would have 3 people collaborate. So I have the person that's a call center expert often will initiate a collaboration between her and the compliance person and the person doing the UX, and they will work on something together. But so that part, little teeny groups work pretty well, but they don't make it very transparent to anyone else. They just go off and come back with something. Nobody really knew what was happening, that they could join if they wanted.
But these developers, would they like to, I mean, how are they like positive to being in this context?
The 2 developers are open to being in a mob.
Oh, sorry, I lost a...
The 2 developers, I believe, are open to being in a mob. I think that's what you're asking there.
So, and the other people, but are they willing to let the developers in? Sort of, do they see, because I mean, I have always collaborated with developers even before mob even existed, or even almost even pair programming. But I always saw the value of being working together really close with developers. But if you don't have that experience, it could be more difficult. So that's why I want to ask you, how are the other people, I mean, how do they feel? What is their like, what I guess I would try to make how they kind of need to see the benefits of actually having the developers early in the process. That would be the first step, I guess, just to see the value. And it was really difficult to answer the question when I don't have the situation and how the relationships are today. But you need to want to collaborate. And to want to collaborate, you need to probably see the need for it. So exposing the need for it. It could be like, I know at least a lot of designers that are sort of complaining about their designs not being implemented in the correct way, or they did a lot of design that wasn't even possible to implement because they didn't talk to a developer like, is this possible, or will this take like 3 years? so like seeing the benefits of early have development in the process.
So,
Because
yeah, I do think it's a tough question. I take away from what you said, Leah, is to expose the need for collaboration. And then you've quite a bit about whether they want to collaborate. I really do think they want to collaborate. I think people are very open to it, but they can't figure out when they would do it more than they do.
So like having workshops together could be, what I usually do is like design studios is when you collaborate. I mean, it's not just developers, it could be like in my case, I work with a lot of editorial staff, so they are also in the workshops and collaborating. So finding different kinds of collaboration to start with, to get different ideas on the same problem and get a common understanding of the problem, I guess is the first. And then sometimes it's, I know people start with just having like sitting beside a developer when implementing, or like you can start with like baby steps and try what works. Like what do you usually say, like turn up the good, what work, do more of that. So try different things, and because there isn't really one answer fits all or one recipe fits everything. So, but try, I guess, experiment and try different things and see what works, and like evaluate, did this work? Did this make it easier? And like have a sort of like a retro, what worked? What did it? What can we make more of or less of? Or what do we need to do to make collaboration smoother? Or
thank you very much for exploring. It's a strange question. Does anyone else have anything to add before Scott takes it to another question?
There are lots of ways to collaborate. The mob programming seems special in some ways because my experience was, once I started working with other people doing programming, software development, I worked on teams, but the teams never actually did anything like a team, like you would picture a sports team or other team kind of activities. They were team only because they worked on the same product or the same manager and things like that. So there are many opportunities in the workplace to collaborate on things, but we almost always end up with the least effective collaboration mechanisms. And mob programming just kind of accidentally worked out well for us. Like we didn't set out to say, this is how we should work. We set out to, how can we get better at collaborating? And all the things we were doing eventually gathered themselves together as mob programming. It wasn't that we said, oh, we should bring everybody together and work together all day long. So we were doing all kinds of collaborations besides coding leading up to this. One of them was collaboration on going to meetings. Now, I don't like meetings. What we found was if an individual goes to the meeting, they come back, they have only their perspective they brought with them, or only their ability to share what they could share in that meeting. We had decided to turn up the good on pairing, which was, we were learning to do pair programming with this team. To turn up the good on pair programming, let's try pairing on other things. So we started pairing going to meetings. So somebody got called to a meeting in another department, they'd bring a pair with them. Almost immediately, we retrospected on that as soon as they got back, and they said, gosh, we have a much better understanding. We were better able to make our points. We now have a fuller interaction with these other people, where one person was good at saying something and the other wasn't. They took turns doing it. It just was marvelous. So there are many things we can collaborate on. The easier we make it to collaborate, the better we're going to be. An example of bad collaboration is messaging. Please forgive me for saying this maybe, but Slack, emails, meetings, we can find better ways to collaborate. Let's turn up the good on collaboration and see what happens. It can go for almost any kind of work. And the better we get at it, the easier it becomes to do other sorts of work with it. We've just neglected this in software development for decades. I know most of the companies I went to originally, do contract work, everybody sat either in their own cubicle or in their own area. You often sat around people who weren't even on your own team. So the easy conversations that could happen were never happening. I started taking a lot of notes on that back in the early 2000s, late 90s, and looking for ways we could turn up the good on collaborating back then. I just didn't realize it would become the focus of my life as it has now. But boy, there's lots of good things you can do. And I'm glad you're at least exploring it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I'm going to go ahead and turn off talking for you. But thanks a bunch for asking your question. So we have just one minute left. And so I think I'd like to go ahead and answer a question that I suspect is on a lot of people's minds, which is, how would you like to continue? How can you possibly continue this conversation? I can tell a lot of people are really enjoying it. There's a lot of people who are still engaged. We still have most of the people who started this journey with us a little while ago before the break are still with us now. And so a good way to continue the conversation is to join Agile New England's Slack workspace. I'm going to put the URL for that up on the screen. Here we go. Should be shared now. And then you can join the mob programming channel in that workspace. If you want to contact one of the panelists, Eventbrite sent reminder emails 2 hours and also 10 minutes right before the event. Those emails had a link to a web page with mini bios of everyone that's here on the panel, which included contact information. I know that people, I believe Lisi has been dropping Twitter and LinkedIn URLs for panelists in the chat as well, so you can follow people that way. But yeah, this has been a great event so far. Well, I guess it's now that we're at the end. So, and my apologies I know I was in the driver's seat as the moderator, but I see on the schedule that there's like future events and connections, and I'm not sure what that means. So is there anybody from who was organizing the event willing to jump in and take my spot and facilitate that part of today?
Maybe there's a slide for that. I don't know. Well, we'll just, there will be future events, and
yes,
keep connected with the Agile New England. I think we should do more of these sessions and involve, get other panels together, and I'm really looking forward to that.
I think what was intended by that item was a discussion where attendees could tell us what they would like at future events. So
okay. My apologies.
Allow people to raise hands and call on them and have them say, I'd like an event about X, but very brief statements because we only
okay. Yeah, fantastic. We've got like 4 minutes. If anyone would like to do that, raise your hand, and
or maybe shoot that into the Q&A now. Just put that into Q&A so that we've got a place we've collected it.
Okay. Yeah. So let us know if you liked this and if you want to see more of this, and if you do want to see more of this, what are some other topics you'd like to see? Providing some feedback on other panelists that you'd like to see, that would also be helpful. Who are people who the organizers might not know yet, but should know, and who should definitely be on a panel. Those are all very valuable pieces of information for anyone who's organizing an event like this. So, and I've been really grateful for everyone's participation, both the panelists and and everyone who asked a question. I feel like everyone was very respectful. I feel like this was a very, very productive conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know everyone on the panel a little bit better. Those of you who I had not met before, some of you I had. And yeah, this has been great. Anybody else have any closing thoughts?
Thank you, Scott, very much for that, as well as the people hidden in the background, like David or Nancy or Rebecca or Lisi, and awesome job. Very well run and very well moderated. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and again, thanks to everyone who's been a sponsor to mob programming conferences in the past. I know Agile New England really appreciates that financial support, which allows them to put on events like this. So please keep that coming. And if you think the organization that you represent would be willing to sponsor, please reach out to Agile New England and let them know. All right. Well, I think with that, we're kind of at a good kind of closing. So thanks, everyone.